The evening in our home was calm, as always. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of hot coffee, gazing out the window at the warm glow of streetlights that softly illuminated the raindrops on the glass. Outside, it was quiet, with only the occasional sound of passing cars serving as a reminder that the world beyond our house was still moving. The clock on the wall ticked its familiar rhythm, but I wasn't in a hurry. Josh was working late again, but that had become the norm. I had time to be alone with myself. I cherished these moments of silence when I could reflect on the day that had passed, indulge in a little dreaming, or simply relax. On the table stood our wedding photograph. Josh smiling in a dark blue suit, me in a simple white dress, a bit shy but happy. Back then, everything seemed so clear. We made plans, laughed, and believed that only the best lay ahead of us. I ran my finger over the glass of the frame, reminiscing about those carefree days. But now, our life had changed. We both had become more serious, engrossed in work and responsibilities. And somehow, without realizing it, we stopped being as close as we once were. It wasn't a tragedy, just a new phase. I couldn't shake the thought that perhaps in this new version of our life, there was something important we were overlooking. Maybe it was time to reflect and make some changes. I smiled at these thoughts. Sometimes acknowledging a problem is already half the journey to solving it. As I sat there, savoring the moment of peace, a tiny spark of hope lit up within me. On Saturday, putting aside household chores and everyday worries, I decided to go out to a party. My friend Lily was celebrating her birthday, and to be honest, it had been a long time since I allowed myself to simply unwind. It was a good opportunity to meet friends and take my mind off things. As I entered the cozily decorated hall, filled with laughter and music, something inside me finally relaxed. Lily greeted me with a joyful shout and a warm hug. She had always been the life of the party, and her energy seemed to fill the entire space. Watching her, I caught myself thinking about how long it had been since I felt such lighthearted happiness myself. "You have to meet Mark," Lily said later with a radiant smile, tugging me by the hand. "He's Josh's nephew, just back from university. Really smart guy. And a looker, of course." Mark was standing by the window, holding a glass of some pale drink. He looked younger than I had imagined, but there was something mature, even a little pensive in his eyes. When he noticed us, a subtle, confident smile crossed his face. "Hi," he said calmly, extending his hand. "I'm Mark." "Nice to meet you," I replied, smiling a bit shyly. We started talking. A light conversation about his studies out of state quickly turned into a discussion of everything under the sun. Mark spoke about his plans and shared his impressions of life in a new city. His words carried sincerity and a genuine curiosity about the world around him. I noticed how skillfully he held the attention of his conversation partner. Not too assertively, but with quiet confidence. Mark was both easygoing and surprisingly profound. His maturity was striking, as was his ability to listen, a rare quality that it seemed I hadn't encountered in a long time. An hour passed unnoticed. We laughed, talked about life, and to my surprise, I found the conversation genuinely enjoyable. At one point, he looked at me with a slight smile. "You've probably heard enough about my plans. What about you? What do you do?" he asked. I hesitated, searching for the right words because at that moment, it occurred to me that I hadn't asked myself that question in a long time. Who am I? What drives me? But his calm and unpretentious manner put me at ease, and I told him a little about my work, my hobbies, and before I even realized it, some of the doubts that had been troubling me. As the evening drew to a close, Mark smiled and wished me a good night. "It was great meeting you. I'm sure we'll see each other again," he said, giving a casual wave before walking away. I watched him leave, trying to pinpoint what had left such a strong impression on me. Mark wasn't like anyone I usually met. There was something genuine about him. After that meeting, I couldn't get Mark out of my mind. His words, his smile, even the small gestures I might have overlooked before, now kept resurfacing in my thoughts. It was strange to me how deeply he had embedded himself in my memory. After all, it was just a chance encounter at a party. Or was it? That evening, while washing dishes after dinner, thoughts of him crept up on me again. I suddenly remembered how he spoke about his studies with such enthusiasm and excitement about the future. It reminded me of how I used to be, full of dreams, ambitions, and a fire in my eyes. That fire had long since dimmed, but in his presence, I felt as though a spark had been reignited. The next time we met was at a family lunch at Josh's parents' house. It was the usual Sunday gathering, where all the relatives came together to eat, talk, and simply spend time as a family. I entered the living room wearing my usual polite smile, but as soon as I spotted Mark among the guests, my heart gave a slight flutter. He was sitting in the corner, calmly flipping through a book, but when he noticed me, he lifted his gaze and gave a small nod. "Hi," I said, trying to sound composed. "Hello," he replied with a faint smile. His calm demeanor somehow drew me in even more. At the table, I found myself unconsciously seeking him out with my eyes. I asked him questions, things like, "How do you like the new city?" and "What are your plans next?" He answered in detail, yet without pretension, with a measured and calm tone, as if the subjects weren't of great importance to him. Still, I caught myself noticing that his voice stood out to me, resonating just a little louder than the rest of the conversations at the table. When Mark stood to help clear the dishes, I volunteered to assist. It was the perfect opportunity to continue our conversation. We stood in the kitchen, exchanging playful remarks, when he suddenly asked, "Do you often come to these family lunches?" "Not so much lately," I admitted. "Work, life, and—" I hesitated, unsure if I should share something so personal. "Sometimes it's just hard to find the energy for it." He nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. His gaze was steady yet perceptive, as though he could see right through me. I realized I was saying more than I had intended, as if his presence encouraged openness. Later, when I returned home, I felt a strange pull in my chest. It wasn't just excitement, it was something new, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And no matter how hard I tried to push the thought away, I couldn't deny it. Mark had become something more to me than just my husband's nephew. After the family dinner, I began to realize just how strongly I was drawn to Mark. His voice, the way he spoke, even his simple smile, all of it was lodged firmly in my mind. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just curiosity. It was attraction. But what next? What did he think of me? I couldn't find the answer. Our next encounter happened soon after. We crossed paths again at another family gathering at Josh's parents' house. When I walked into the living room, Mark was already there, chatting with some relatives. I smiled at him from across the room, but he only gave me a slight nod in return. This time, his gaze lacked the ease I had seen before. He seemed reserved, almost distant. During dinner, I tried to strike up a conversation with him again. Something casual like, "How was your week?" or "How's school going?" But his responses were brief, almost formal. It felt as though he was deliberately avoiding giving me any reason to continue the discussion. This chill hurt more than I had anticipated. Doubt began creeping in. Maybe everything I had felt before was just an illusion. Maybe he had just been polite, and I had read too much into it. When dinner ended and the guests began to leave, I found a moment to approach him. He was in the kitchen, clearing plates. "Mark, is everything okay?" I asked softly, making sure no one else could hear. He looked at me, holding my gaze for a moment before nodding. His smile was faint, but it lacked the warmth I had come to expect. "Yeah, of course. Why do you ask?" Something inside me clenched. His voice was polite but cold. I knew he understood what I was really asking, but he wasn't willing to address it directly. "It's just, you seem a bit distant," I said, choosing my words carefully. "If I said or did something wrong?" He shook his head and let out a small sigh, as if weighing his response. "No, it's nothing like that. Everything's fine. I'm just trying to be careful," he finally said. Those words echoed in my mind. Careful? What did he mean by that? It felt like he had cracked the door open for a moment, only to shut it again before I could look inside. When he left, I stayed behind, lost in thought about his behavior. Why was he avoiding me? Could he have felt something but been afraid of it? Or was it the opposite? Was he simply not interested? The questions swirled in my head, making my heart race. His distance only made him more magnetic. And that, in turn, only deepened my intrigue. Our next meeting happened a few days later when the family gathered once again to celebrate Josh's sister's birthday. The atmosphere was relaxed. Laughter, conversations, the gentle clinking of dishes. But all of it felt muted to me, drowned out by the simple fact that Mark was there. Just knowing he was nearby made me nervous, yet strangely exhilarated. This time, I decided to take action. I'd had enough of overthinking his distance and getting lost in my assumptions. When the moment arose, just as he was about to step out into the garden, I stopped him. "Mark, can you help me with something?" I asked. He turned and looked at me with mild surprise. "I want to replant some flowers in the garden, but I can't manage it on my own." He hesitated briefly but nodded. "Sure, why not?" he said, following me outside. We ended up alone among the thick bushes and flower beds. I tried to appear casual, chatting about the garden and how I'd recently been trying to pay attention to little things like plants. He responded briefly but didn't pull away, which felt like progress. When we finished working on the flowers, I gathered my courage. Brushing the dirt from my hands, I turned to face him. "You know," I began, trying to keep my tone calm despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I appreciate you helping out. You seem so mature for your age, even wise." He smiled, but he didn't say anything. His silence felt like a challenge, and I decided to take a risk. "Sometimes I think we understand each other more than it seems," I said, meeting his eyes. "You feel it too, don't you?" For a moment, he froze, his expression turning serious. Then he took a deep breath and, gently but deliberately, shifted the conversation. "The flowers turned out great. I think they'll really brighten up the garden," he said, clearly avoiding my question. The moment was brief, but charged with tension. Mark understood exactly what I was trying to say, yet he chose not to engage with it. However, he didn't walk away or cut the conversation short. Instead, he left an odd trace, open yet closed at the same time. When we returned to the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions, embarrassed yet still hopeful. The conversation hadn't given me a clear answer, but something in his gaze, in his refusal to address the issue directly, hinted at feelings he wasn't ready to share. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't stop. After that conversation, there was no turning back for me. My attraction to Mark had grown stronger than I could admit even to myself. Every glance, every word from him only fueled the fire. But his restraint, his unwillingness to open up to me, made the feeling almost unbearable. It was a challenge I couldn't walk away from. I began looking for opportunities to talk to him. At first, it was innocent messages. "How are you?" "How was your day?" His responses were brief, polite, but distant. It frustrated me and stoked my curiosity even more. I felt there was something behind that wall of coldness, something deeper, and it wouldn't let me rest. At another family gathering, I tried again to get closer. This time, I invited Mark for a walk, using the excuse that I needed some fresh air. We strolled along a small lake near his parents' house. "Mark," I said, stopping at the water's edge, "I don't want you to think I'm trying to make you feel something or complicate things. But I can't ignore that there's something between us. I'm not wrong, am I?" He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze heavy as though he were carefully weighing each word before speaking. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean it's right." Those words, but I didn't back down. "Sometimes what's right is what we feel, not what logic dictates," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. "You understand that, don't you?" He turned away, staring at the water. His expression was one I'd never seen before. A mix of sadness, confusion, and some kind of internal struggle. "We can't," he said quietly. "It's not right. You know that, no matter how much you want to deny it." The words were final, or at least he wanted them to be. After that walk, he began avoiding me. He didn't reply to my messages, didn't engage in conversations at family dinners. If we found ourselves in the same space, he would politely nod but wouldn't linger. But his coldness didn't stop me. It only fueled my desire to prove him wrong. To show him that he was afraid, that he felt the same way I did but couldn't admit it. I started messaging him more frequently, finding excuses to reach out. Once I invited him for coffee, framing it as just a friendly meeting. He declined. Finally, one evening, after I sent him a long message trying to explain my feelings, he replied. Briefly, but with a precision that shattered me. "I can't allow this. You're married. I won't be the one to destroy everything. Please stop." Even then, even after that message, I couldn't stop. In his words, I heard not just resolve, but fear. And I was convinced that behind that fear was something he couldn't bring himself to admit. After his message, I decided to step back. It seemed like the only right thing to do. His words were crystal clear, and I knew that if I kept pushing, I might not only destroy the fragile trust between us, but also create even more complications for both of us. Yet, despite my decision to maintain distance, thoughts of him lingered. Mark had become a shadow, following me in every quiet moment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our story wasn't over. Fate, however, had its own plans. A few days later, I stopped by Josh's office to drop off some documents he had forgotten at home. It was a routine errand, nothing out of the ordinary. I walked into the reception area, handed the papers to the secretary, and was about to leave when I saw a familiar figure. Mark. He was standing by the window, talking to one of the employees. His confident posture and the calm, deliberate way he gestured filled me with both admiration and a tinge of fear. I froze, unsure of what to do. Should I leave before he noticed me? Or approach him? In the end, I didn't have to choose. He turned and caught my gaze. For a moment, surprise flickered in his eyes, but he quickly resumed his usual composed expression. He wrapped up his conversation and walked toward me. My heart raced as he approached. "Hi," he said, stopping at a distance that felt slightly too far to be casual. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound steady, though my voice betrayed a faint tremor. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm helping Josh with a project," he said, offering a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I guess we've bumped into each other again by chance." We exchanged a few more neutral remarks, but the tension between us was almost tangible. Every word, every movement seemed loaded with unspoken meaning that neither of us dared to acknowledge. He probably felt as uncomfortable as I did, but he didn't let it show. "How are you?" he asked unexpectedly, breaking a tense silence. His voice was soft, but I caught something more in it than just politeness. "I'm fine," I said, averting my gaze to hide my unease. "Work, home, the usual. What about you?" "I'm fine too," he replied briefly, fixing me with his serious gaze. "Keeping busy." The exchange was so banal that it left me frustrated. All the things I wanted to say felt impossible to articulate. Instead, I retreated behind the safety of formalities. "I'm glad to hear you're doing well," I said, trying to bring the conversation to a close, though my voice revealed my inner turmoil. He nodded slightly, but didn't walk away. I wanted to say something to ease the tension, to break through the awkwardness, but I had no idea how. Inside, I felt torn apart by a conflict between what I wanted and what I knew I should do. "I need to go," he said finally, breaking the silence. "It was good to see you." He turned and headed toward the exit, but just before leaving, he glanced back for the briefest moment. In his eyes, I saw a mix of regret and hesitation that pierced straight to my core. And in that instant, I realized that despite his words and efforts to keep his distance, there was still something between us. Something neither of us could easily ignore. When I left the office and got into my car, my heart was still pounding. The memory of his glance, his words, stayed with me all evening. I tried to convince myself it was just a chance encounter, but deep down, I knew. This was yet another chapter in our increasingly tangled story. A few days after that encounter, I went to an office building to collect some documents for work. It was an ordinary day, completely unremarkable. I stepped into the elevator, my thoughts occupied with tasks ahead, when a voice made my heart skip a beat. "Hi," Mark said, stepping in after me. His tone was calm, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I froze, barely able to mask my nervousness. The elevator started moving, and a heavy silence settled between us. We were standing too close to ignore each other, yet neither of us dared to speak. Time seemed to stretch unbearably. And then, it happened. The elevator jolted suddenly and came to an abrupt stop. The lights on the panel flickered off, plunging us into dimness. Both of us instinctively reached for the walls of the cabin. "Looks like we're stuck," Mark said, glancing up at the panel as if hoping it was just a temporary glitch. "Perfect," I muttered, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The confined space suddenly felt even smaller. Being alone with him in such close quarters, it was a situation I had both feared and secretly longed for. Mark pressed the emergency call button. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a faint smile. "Looks like we'll be here for a while." At first, we talked about trivial things. How often old buildings like this experienced such problems. I tried to keep the conversation light to mask the turmoil inside me, but it didn't last. Gradually, our words grew more personal. The elevator, this confined space, seemed to strip away the walls we had so carefully built between us. "You know I'm trying to do the right thing, don't you?" he asked suddenly, breaking a brief pause. His voice was quiet, but I could hear the struggle in it. "You're making this hard for me." "Hard?" I turned to face him, a mix of pain and defiance rising within me. "What about me? Do you think it's easy for me to try and ignore what I feel?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. In that moment, he looked lost, vulnerable, so unlike the confident man I thought I knew. "You don't understand," he said at last. "This would change everything. Not just for us. For everyone." "Maybe everything's already changed," I shot back, unable to hold back any longer. "You can deny it all you want, but you feel it too. I know you do." Mark looked at me, and this time his gaze was direct, unguarded. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. Without thinking, I took a step forward, and in the next moment, we were so close I could hear his breath. I gave in to the impulse and kissed him. It was electric, overwhelming, a culmination of everything we had been holding back. We spent hours in that elevator, our barriers completely shattered. When the doors finally opened, letting us out into the world again, I felt an incredible rush of happiness, but also a gnawing uncertainty. What now? What came next after this? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. A few days later, I was still reeling from what had happened in the elevator. Mark and I hadn't seen each other since, but the memory of that closeness, his hesitation, every word, every glance, lingered within me. I knew continuing down this path was dangerous, yet the need to understand his feelings and my own had become an almost obsessive drive. That day, Mark came to our house. Josh had asked him to help with some project, and of course he agreed. I knew he was coming, but I hadn't anticipated how much it would stir up a storm of emotions within me. I tried to act as composed as possible, greeting him the way I always did. Josh was downstairs, caught up in a phone call, leaving Mark and me alone in the living room. "Hi," I said softly, trying to sound indifferent. "Hi," he replied, casting me a fleeting glance that spoke volumes more than any words. He wanted to avoid the conversation, the situation, but something kept him rooted in place. "You're avoiding me," I said, deciding to confront him directly. "And I know why." He turned to me, his eyes filled with the familiar mix of guilt and tension. "Because this is wrong," he said quietly. "We can't keep doing this. Nothing good will come of it." "And are you sure that's true?" I asked, stepping closer, my heart pounding. "You can lie to yourself, but I saw it in your eyes in the elevator. You feel it too." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. I moved even closer, and before he could say anything, I leaned in and kissed him. For a moment, he kissed me back, as if he had finally given in to the weight of his emotions. And then we heard footsteps. At the doorway stood Josh. He froze, taking in the scene before him, and the silence that followed was deafening. It lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. His face shifted from confusion to shock and finally to anger. "What is this?" His voice was ice cold, filled with disbelief. His eyes darted between me and Mark. "Josh, it's not what you think," I began, knowing full well the futility of those words. The tension in the room was suffocating, crushing all three of us. Mark seemed to decide that the only way out for him was to leave. "I'm sorry," he muttered, avoiding Josh's gaze as he hurriedly exited the room. Josh didn't take his eyes off me, waiting for me to say something. But what could I say? Every word felt meaningless. The silence was tearing us apart until he finally spoke. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been hiding this from me?" "It's not what you think." I tried again, but he raised his hand to stop me. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice tightly controlled but brimming with rage. "I've seen enough." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. I felt everything I had built over the years crumble in an instant. In Josh's eyes, I saw the pain I had caused. And worse still, I knew there was no way to undo it. After Mark left, the room was steeped in tense silence. Josh stood there, staring at me, his emotions flickering across his face. Pain, disbelief, anger. The air felt so thick that it was nearly impossible to breathe. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat, becoming a knot of regret. "Are you going to explain?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was cold as ice, but there was a crack in it. The voice of a man trying to hold himself together on the edge of a precipice. "Josh, I began, knowing that no words could make this right. "I never wanted this to happen." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Didn't want it to happen? So what? You just accidentally kissed him? Accidentally broke what we had?" His voice grew louder as his suppressed anger began to surface. "It's more complicated than you think," I tried to explain. "I felt lost, alone. Something's been different between us for a long time, and you know it. And so you decided to find comfort with my nephew?" His voice wavered, and I saw him clench his fists, trying to stay composed. At that moment, Mark returned. His face was tense, but he stepped into the room as if he knew he couldn't just walk away and leave things unresolved. He stopped, his head slightly bowed, as though apologizing for even being there. "Josh," Mark began, his tone quiet but firm. "I didn't want this to happen. This isn't her fault. If anyone's to blame, it's me. I shouldn't have—" "Shut up," Josh snapped, spinning toward him. "Your fault? Do you think that changes anything? Did you sleep with my wife?" "No," Mark said, stepping back. "It never went that far. I would never—" Josh stared at him, scrutinizing his sincerity, but the trust in his eyes was long gone. He turned to me, his expression demanding the truth. "Is that true?" he asked. "You didn't sleep with him?" "No," I said, my voice breaking as tears threatened to spill. It was just kisses. I swear, just kisses," he repeated with a bitter laugh. As if that makes a difference. Josh, please, I know I made a mistake, but I didn't want to destroy us. I tried to explain, but he waved his hand to cut me off. You already did. Don't you see that? You destroyed everything we had. I wanted to argue, to tell him that we could still fix this. But deep down, I knew he was right. I saw it in his eyes. In that moment, something broke between us. Irreparably. This wasn't just a fight. It was the collapse of trust that had once held us together. Mark tried to intervene again. I'll leave, he said, his voice steady but subdued. I don't want to be the reason for this conflict, but Josh, I'm sorry. Sorry? Josh snapped, turning on him again. Do you think your sorry fixes anything? Just leave. Get out before I do something I'll regret. Mark nodded silently and left the room. But even after he was gone, his presence lingered like a shadow hanging over us. Josh turned back to me one last time. His gaze was heavy, filled with anger and disappointment. I don't know what to do with this. With us? He said finally, his voice softer now, almost broken. I need time. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the room. And that's when I realized I wasn't just alone in that moment. I was alone in my life. I had destroyed everything that had once kept me afloat. The house became quieter than ever. After Josh left, everything seemed frozen. His absence lingered in every little detail. The empty side of the bed, his favorite mug on the kitchen shelf, the silent television he used to keep on for background noise. Even the air felt different. And Mark? He vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. Everything I had built over the years crumbled in just a few moments. I sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the floor, feeling the emptiness spread through me. At first, I blamed everyone but myself. Josh, for growing distant, for his indifference. Mark, for not stopping me sooner, for entering my life when I was most vulnerable. But the more time I spent alone with my thoughts, the clearer it became. It was I who had destroyed everything. My decisions, my weaknesses, my selfishness. Weeks passed, then months. Josh, as promised, took time to think. We exchanged occasional messages, but they were short and formal, more like conversations with a stranger. He took his belongings and rented an apartment in another part of town. It wasn't an official separation, but I knew the path back would be incredibly difficult, if it even existed. Mark stayed silent. His family didn't mention him, and I didn't dare to ask. At first, I waited for a call, a message, any sign that he was thinking of me. But as time passed, I began to understand that he had made his choice. He left this story to protect himself. And maybe he was right. At some point, I realized I couldn't continue living in this endless cycle of guilt. It wasn't living. It was existing in a frozen state. I booked an appointment with a therapist, deciding for the first time to voice what had been tormenting me inside. It was difficult at first, to admit my mistakes and vulnerabilities. But with each session, I learned to let go of what I could no longer change. I began returning to myself, to the person I once was. I tried to reclaim the parts of me that I had lost. I remembered how much I used to love painting and picked up a brush again. I started going for morning runs when the city was just waking up, feeling the weight in my chest slowly lift. I read more, walked more, and spent time with friends who didn't press me for answers. One evening, I stood by the window, a cup of hot tea in my hands. Rain was pouring outside, but this time it didn't feel melancholic. It felt cleansing, almost symbolic. I watched the drops slide down the glass, thinking about how, despite everything, I was still here, alive, breathing, and that meant I had a chance to start again. Josh and I never reconciled. After some time, he wrote me a letter. There was no anger in it. No accusations. Just a sincere wish for me to find myself. He was moving forward too, and I knew it was the right thing. We had loved each other once, but our story had reached its end. As for Mark, He became part of my past. His image occasionally surfaced in my memories, but it no longer brought pain. It was a lesson I had learned. Not every feeling is worth pursuing. Not every passion is justified. Now I live alone, but for the first time in a long while, I feel whole. I'm learning to be honest with myself, with my desires and my weaknesses. I'm learning not to fear my mistakes, but to accept them as part of my journey. It wasn't an easy victory, but it was a victory over myself and my fears. Life moved quietly and steadily forward. Each day became filled with small but meaningful discoveries. I focused on myself, on my work, and on new hobbies that I allowed myself to explore. It seemed I had finally found a sense of harmony, though some nights thoughts of what I had left behind crept into my mind. One warm spring day, while walking down a bustling city street, a poster caught my eye. It announced a local photography exhibit. I had never been particularly drawn to photography, but something about that moment, the way the sunlight bathed the streets and the lively energy in the air, compelled me to go inside. The exhibit was stunning. The photographs were vivid and deeply moving, each one telling a story. In one of the galleries, I stopped before a series of images capturing moments of human vulnerability and strength. One photograph in particular caught my attention, a picture of an empty bench in a park, bathed in soft morning light. Below it, a caption read, "Sometimes it's important to just sit and let time do its work." I stood there, gazing at the photograph, feeling something shift inside me. The words felt like they were meant for me, a reminder that everything I had been through had a purpose. I decided to find out who the artist was. In the corner of the exhibit, there was a placard with the photographer's name and a short biography. The name was familiar. Too familiar. It was Mark. My heart raced, but I refused to let panic take over. I hadn't sought him out, nor did I want to rekindle what had torn us both apart. But knowing that he had continued to create, that he had found his own path, gave me an unexpected sense of peace. I decided to write a brief note, which I left at the feedback counter. "Your work is inspiring. Thank you for the reminder that time heals and teaches. Wishing you the best in your art." I didn't leave my name. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't for him. It was for me. A few weeks later, while wandering through a park by chance, I came across the very bench from the photograph. It was real. I sat down, watching the trees that had burst into fresh green foliage. Around me, children were playing. Someone was walking their dog, and another person was reading a book beneath a tree. It was a perfectly serene spot. And it was there, in that quiet moment, that I realized something profound. My story didn't need closure or a definitive ending. Everything that had happened was part of my journey, but I was no longer living in the past. I was here, in the present,